there's almost an imbalance of men and women, and men kind of have this Peter Pan syndrome where women are like almost like a buffet of women to choose from. And the life, what I've noticed, at least in my experiences through my friend groups, are people are okay focusing on other priorities at the beginning, so people don't think about settling down maybe as quickly.
Welcome back to Quiet the Clock. I'm very excited to welcome my next guest, Siobhan. Very grateful to have her here. And there's been so many incredibly cool things about doing this podcast. But one of the best things is the people that I'm able to connect with and connect to. And also having people reach out in response to the podcast. And I've really just been so grateful for those experiences. So Siobhan and I were connected through my amazing client, Jen, who was a previous guest on episode 1. And her and I connected earlier this summer for her to share her story with me. And here we are today to record. So Siobhan, thank you so much for being here. I'm so grateful to have you. And I know you were sharing off camera, like you're in the middle of a couple of trips. You have a full work day today. So I'm so grateful that you've made the time to talk with us today. So before I jump into like your journey, your egg freezing journey, your journey through your 30s, I like every guest to tell us about themselves because everyone is so incredible in their own right. So kind of share a little bit about you and who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Siobhan. I work in advertising. Excuse me. I have since I graduated college, and right after college, I moved up to New York. It was like I was kind of a nerd in college and like studied advertising, so it's kind of an advertising mecca up there. And then during the pandemic, kind of my priorities shifted. So I moved down to Tampa, Florida. And I've been working remotely still for my New York agency ever since. And one of my dearest friends, Jen, as you mentioned, is a client of yours, and she put me on to this podcast. And I watched her episode and basically cried because she's like such a cool person. So I think that this podcast is really interesting and something I kind of wish that I had heard about when I was deciding if I wanted to do this journey. So I was excited to be a part of it. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. I so appreciate you saying that because that's certainly one of the intentions of the podcast is just cultivating more conversation around this topic. I know, and I've shared that when I froze, I only knew one other person. There wasn't, the amount of resources there are now. There wasn't, stuff on Instagram. So I appreciate you like acknowledging that because this is part of the intention of the podcast is to have more conversations, normalize the journeys, normalizing egg freezing. So I appreciate you saying that, and I appreciate you being here to contribute to that. So thank you. Thank you. So let's dive into, maybe we'll start with your egg freezing journey and what you had shared with me on your call, that there were some other health things happening simultaneously to that.
Yeah. So when I moved down to Tampa, obviously, I'm sure many people at all ages felt similarly, but I started kind of feeling scared because I was in my early 30s when the pandemic hit, and I felt like I was also I was staying with my dad who's, getting older. So I was very closed in a bubble, didn't kind of go out during the pandemic at all. So I was getting kind of nervous. Like, these are my last years that, it'll be okay or easy to have kids. And the world's on pause. Also, during the pandemic, I went through a pretty big transformation. I lost 120 pounds. I found out that I had a condition that was causing me to gain weight, and got that under control with my doctor, and therefore went through this huge transformation. So the world was going through a transformation with the pandemic. I was going through a personal transition and transformation. And then also there was just this fear of I'm a single 30 whatever year old in a pandemic where I can't do anything but hang out with my dad. And so I felt like, oh no, I'm running out of time in a time where I can't do anything. And that's kind of what led me to this journey.
Yeah, that narrative of running out of time, that's certainly one. A lot of the women that find themselves in this demographic or considering egg freezing or single and dating in their 30s, that's a common narrative. And it was one of the ones that I kept hearing a lot. It was one of the ones that informed the title of this podcast of Quiet the Clock, and how do we shift out of this narrative of I'm running out of time. And you bring up an amazing point too about pandemic. And I had so many clients, single as well, feeling the same thing. Like we lose this amount of time. We lose 2 years or the ability to date. Some people continued dating, some people paused on dating. But what was it like for you mentally and emotionally? Because you did have so much going on at one time, your health transformation, pandemic, were you in therapy, support systems, your own narratives? How did you navigate all that happening at once?
Yeah, it was pretty overwhelming. Also, during this time, I went through the process of buying my first home, um, which for anyone who has or is thinking about it, it is a very overwhelming
Yeah,
experience.
you just wanted
Amazing
to
and
like pile it all on at once.
yeah, yeah. And as someone that suffers from anxiety, like it was a bold choice for me to do that when all this was going on. But no, unfortunately, I was not in therapy at the time. I feel like therapy, though I had not done anything like that before, I had heard a lot and was interested in it. But um, I feel like finding a therapist that works for you is almost like dating, which is a full-time job, and then finding a therapist is a full-time job, and then I have a full-time job. So it was just like another thing that was like, I need to do this, but um, it's just another thing on the list. Truly, I leaned on my dad a lot for support and my family. One of the reasons I chose Tampa is because I have a really big family down here and a support system down here. So um, I use them as my free therapy. Thank you to my family. But yeah, I mean, it was very overwhelming. I think each, minus the pandemic that obviously was tragic, I think each of those experiences I was going through was very challenging, but also rewarding.
Mm.
So just worked through it with my homemade support system and barely scraped on by.
Yeah. Well, again, a lot at once. And, you're so right in saying like to add the search of a therapist is very overwhelming in itself while you have all these other overwhelming things going on. So I agree with that. That can be a very daunting thing. So it's awesome that you had a great support system in your family. Let's dive into the egg freezing piece of this. Like, was it a decision that you were thinking about for a while? How did you learn about egg freezing? Can you kind of walk us through that process?
Yeah, absolutely. So I always knew since I was like a kid that I just felt like I was meant to be a mom. I have always been very maternal, probably to the chagrin of my friends. Like, in college, I would be the one that would like make sure everyone's getting enough water while we're drinking. Like my friends in high school would call me Mama Dear. It's just like always been intrinsically part of who I am. And then as you get older and you realize it like everything doesn't just fall into place like you think it will when you're a kid. I was getting older. I lived in New York, which I'm sure everyone has different experiences. My experience was dating in New York is very challenging. So I was just finding myself older and single. And there's, per this podcast name, there is this clock that women deal with that was just getting louder and louder the older I got. And then the pandemic happened. So as I mentioned, that was also getting louder and I felt very stuck, like I couldn't do anything about it. And I felt like my fertility was kind of like Schrodinger's cat. I had never seen anyone about it. So at that time, I was like, I don't know if I'm in a fine place. I don't know if maybe years ago I like this has been something that may be a problem from years ago that I've never known about. So for so long, I just had it in the little box and I didn't know if it was a problem or if I was fine. So as this clock got louder and louder during the pandemic, I decided if this is important to me, I just need to bite the bullet and go see a fertility specialist, even though I am still single. So that's kind of how I started my journey. And then once I did, I decided, and here now, I'm kind of at the precipice of that age where every day counts in terms of when my fertility might take a steeper
Mm-hmm.
decline. So I should do something about this just as an insurance policy as I continue to like figure out my life.
Yeah, you are like touching on so many narratives again that just are threads through so many women's story. And I think one of the ones that you and I have talked about is just the kind of this not knowing about your fertility health, maybe not having had conversations with doctors previously, and just feeling like I probably should know these things. Was there
Yeah,
any hesitation or fear for you to go get your fertility health checked? And I ask that because I do currently have a couple clients that are at that age too and are having the same thoughts that you're having and are unsure about their fertility health, but they're worried to go have it checked. They're worried what they may find out.
absolutely. Which is why I reference it like Schrodinger's cat. Like right now the box is closed, so I don't know if there's a problem or not. And for a bit, that like I was okay with that. And then the older I got, the more nervous I was of what was in that box. And this is such a silly reference, but something that really did it for me was an episode of New Girl where two characters who are the same age go to a fertility specialist to just get checked out. And one of them hears really great news and that like took the relief off of her. And another one uh, didn't have as strong results and therefore had to make some pretty quick decisions. And as silly as it is, that episode really made me think like, well, what if I'm, the person that has issues and I'm wasting time where maybe I should have taken a next step because I'm just scared to hear the results. And as someone that deals with anxiety, I think that was just my anxiety working against me at the time, and I had to just kind of take the leap and start my journey.
Yeah, I don't think that's a silly reference at all. I think sort of these signs come from the universe sort of unexpectedly that kind of give us that little nudge to kind of push
Yeah.
us to do the thing that we've been thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
That's incredible. I think that's just a testament to there's more resources or there's more conversation about it, right? It's in a TV episode. Now we're having podcasts about it. People are talking about it more on social media. So wherever you get that inspiration or that motivation or that final push, I don't think is silly at all.
Thank you.
So share with us a little bit more how just the process, the specific process went for you
Mm-hmm.
emotionally, physically, financially. You know, that's obviously a huge consideration that we talked a lot about
Mm-hmm.
on this podcast. So share more about sort of your specific egg freezing journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So the starting the process, I got referred. Luckily, I have a friend who is an OBGYN who had worked in Tampa before, so I got some references from her. Um, and I finally just like took the step to call and make an appointment. I think that going in, getting those tests done, that was an important first step, and then waiting for those results. It's kind of silly, excuse me, scary, similar to what I was going through in buying the house of like, I'm doing this alone as a single
Mm.
woman. And that's both of those processes are processes that as a kid, you're probably not thinking I'll have to go see a fertility specialist one day, but the journey of planning a family and buying a house, those are all journeys that you kind of envision you'll be doing with a partner, and both are very stressful. So doing it alone was kind of an extra little step of scariness because well, like I mentioned, I have a hugely strong support system down here that are there for me in whatever needs I ever need. It's still something that you imagined having with like an intimate partner where you can kind of discuss those feelings and those hesitations and fears. So it was kind of difficult to start that process and go into the office and see couples there while I'm sitting there alone. But in the end, when I got my results back, they were very positive. I was very fortunate as someone who, I think at the time I was 33, starting. So that was a bit of a sign of relief. I also, my doctor at the time told me like, well, we should do this right now. And my Q1 of this year was very busy. So it was a little stressful because I had a lot of travel planned. I had a separate health, like I had a separate surgery plan. So it's kind of like squeezing this process into a very busy schedule, which is very classic me.
I'm learning that. I'm
And
learning that about you.
sorry.
I'm learning that about you.
So yeah, it was a bit stressful for an already emotional process, but maybe that helped me move through it quickly because I just had to fit it in where it could be fit in. But as I mentioned, I was very lucky to have gotten the results that I was or that I did. So I, moved forward with the process very quickly in order to fit it in before my other surgery. And yeah. I mean, it was a stressful and emotional journey, but I'm glad I did it. And I'm very fortunate with the results that I was able to garner.
Yeah, that's great, and I'm so glad you had great results.
Thank you.
Because it's uncertain, right? You go into this, you decide to go into this, and you don't know what the outcome is going to be. So there's a lot of unknowns, and to your point, like very emotional, very overwhelming. You seem to be somebody that has a lot going on at once. So juggling, and I found that too for my experience, like juggling daily life or stressors outside of the egg freezing is tough. And then you add the egg freezing in and getting to the appointments and all the emotional narratives. It's a lot. It's really, really overwhelming. I love what you pointed out too. And maybe this is a good segue into dating. Is this vision you have for yourself? And I think that's a lot. I know I struggle with that. I know a lot of women struggle with that find themselves considering this choice or going through this is like, we didn't imagine that it would be this way, right? We're kind of like, this message is ingrained in us that it'll happen. Like you'll meet your person, you'll have a child, you'll be buying a house with somebody. And I know, for a lot of women, myself too, it's like that was the vision. And when that vision is not coming to life, it's really hard, can be really hard to reconcile that. So I think there's a lot of work to shift those narratives and to, accept a different picture. My experience was a little different because I was in a relationship while freezing, but that was like its own set of alone because I would still go alone to the clinics, but same experience as you. I would see these couples there together. And that was hard for me too. That was a really challenging piece of it. And, we had Marcia Inhorn on a previous episode, and in her research where she interviewed 150 women, a lot of women froze being single, and that was also their same feeling. It's like it should be a more personalized experience where, certain pamphlets or resources are all written to couples, and it should be more personalized and like, if you're single, this is like your packet or this is your thing. So what was that like for you? And I believe you're still single and dating.
Mhm.
What is that like for you now to be single and dating? What has your experience been? And I think something really unique that you and I talked about is that you have lived in many different cities and dated in many different cities. So I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the process of like what you envision when you're a kid, definitely was tough for me to kind of overcome. I am very fortunate with it. My parents, have like this epic love story where they like met when they were what I think of now as children. They were like 20 years old and fell in love and lived their life for 15 years, then had kids. So like growing up, that's kind of what I you just assume. Well, that's how it works then. And I grew up with my brother and my best friend. And they found their people very early and have developed. They were able to take their time and how long it took to get engaged and then married and then start family. So like, yeah, I have all those pictures in my head, and I'm sitting here still on these freaking apps, like trying to date. And yeah, I moved around a bit. I spent most of my adult life in New York, but I did spend 1 year in Seattle, and then now have moved down to Tampa. And it is dating in all these different cities are very frustrating in all different ways, but all frustrating in the same. In New York, it feels like there's almost an imbalance of men and women, and men kind of have this Peter Pan syndrome where women are like almost like a buffet of women to choose from. And the life, what I've noticed, at least in my experiences through my friend groups, are people are okay focusing on other priorities at the beginning, so people don't think about settling down maybe as quickly as when I moved to Seattle, people already had settled down, or moving down to Tampa, people again are have already settled down or found people or even gone through divorces and everything. So I was coming from one way of thinking in terms of dating where I was like, I'm good. I want to focus on my career right now. I'm totally fine with that. Moving to these other areas, being in such a different place than my friends in the areas, was a little arresting.
Hmm.
And then again, dealing with this biological clock, I'm like, oh my God, immediately I'm behind. And what do I do about this? And then I think that also puts an extra pressure on you when you're dating, because when you're getting to the age that I'm at, it's like, okay, well, if I want to meet a person and have time with them before we, take another further step, whether it's marriage or moving in or whatever, and then I want to have time with just that person before we think about having kids. It's like, oh gosh, the next date I go on has to be the one, which is not a healthy way to approach dating. That's a lot of pressure. So while, of course, some of those pressures still feel present in my current dating experience, having gone through this process of freezing my eggs already somewhat lifts some of that pressure, not all, and that's self-inflicted pressure, I know, but it's been somewhat of a relief, even though who knows what my journey will take me to, but at least it's somewhat of a relief, which I think is a better headspace to go into dating. So I'm figuring out dating based on the person I would want to spend time with versus, okay, can we does the timeline work out for when we may want to have kids, and will I be in a position where I can
Yeah.
biologically by that time?
Yeah, certainly. I think there's so much pressure for sure, but I'm happy to hear for you. And I think for many women that make this decision, that's one of the things that, you can extend that timeline and buy yourself a little bit more time so you don't have to go into the dating world with like every date being so much pressure of like, is this going to be the person? Is this going to be my husband? Can this person be the father of my children? And it can be like, who is this person sitting in front of me? Like, do I actually enjoy them, find them interesting? connect with them. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, dating in its own right is challenging. But I think when you're of, certain age, especially where it's the expectation by this time you would have met someone or you should have met somebody. So I'm happy to hear for you that there is this shift and there's less pressure and you can go into the dating world kind of more open to seeing who is in front of you. I found what you shared with me so interesting about the different cities. And one thing you said about New York is there is this extended timeline. And so that probably informs the way people date or don't date. And then you had shared in Seattle, like more of a loneliness. It sounds like you were more confronted with being single because you look at everybody else around you that's already settled down. And how have you dealt with that? How have you dealt with comparison? Because I know for me, that was something that I struggled with, not having met those milestones yet, and then sort of seeing everybody else around me having met them. And while like extremely happy for everybody, it sort of made me feel like, ugh, why not me?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, well, there are so many important people in my life, my brother, my best friends, some other close friends that I'm so happy for them to have found their people earlier than I have. Um, when I was living in New York and I would go home from these weddings or these trips back to my crew, that they were people of similar ages to me and similar life stages, also single, also figuring out the dating life in New York. I felt like, okay, that's fine. I have time. Also, a silly reference. I would always think back to the show Friends and be like, they didn't settle down until the later seasons. I have time. But then moving to Seattle quickly and now to Tampa, yeah, it's pretty tough, speaking more to my Tampa life where I'm here with either family members or friends that already have settled down, some starting kids, some getting engaged, some already married. I'm I I'm I don't have that camaraderie of like my single girlfriends or my single guy friends that are also going through this. So yeah, I feel so behind now, and I'm always the third wheel to like one couple, whether it's my brother and my sister-in-law or my best friend and his wife or whatever it is. I always feel like this third wheel. So then that adds additional pressure to a pressure I already have in my head, thinking like, oh, when I was a kid, I thought I would get married young like my parents and live my life and have children. Like there's the self-inflicted pressure, the societal pressure,
Yeah.
the biological pressure, and then like now also being in this atmosphere where all my social activities are with couples. That's something pretty tough to deal with. And it's kind of like, I think also, um another self-inflicted pressure. I feel like I have to be like a strong woman, so
Mm,
you shouldn't need a man or you shouldn't need a partner or anything like that. And of course I don't need that, but it's a goal, like it's something I want for my life. So um it's definitely been an adjustment, and the grind for dating is it gets exhausting.
yeah.
So, it's something I have to continuously remind myself, okay, this is something you want to prioritize. Push through another bad date or push through another awkward conversation on the dating app because hanging out with a bunch of couple friends is not gonna help me reach my dating goals.
I think that's another hard thing that this decade presents. It's that it's just really point where the paths really start to diverge, and you do have people, maybe moving to different cities or getting married or having children. Some are still single, and I think 20s is more of a decade. Everyone's kind of still on the same path. Like everyone's kind of dating and figuring out their careers and partying, and then I think in the 30s, it's like everyone starts to go their different ways, and people that you were super close with you don't relate to anymore. And I know for me, I had three very best friends that I would sit at a dinner table with, and I couldn't even relate to them anymore. So I think that's another dynamic to deal with in your 30s if you find yourself still single and dating. One thing I wanted to touch upon that we had talked about, and you sort of mentioned it just in what you just said there, is sort of a lot of burden falls on women. Like, right, we should be strong and independent and all these things, but we do desire partnership. And I think this burden or these narratives of running out of time or left behind kind of fall mostly with us. And certainly having to do the egg freezing falls on us. And that's something I wanted to talk about here because you and I talked about it when we connected a couple months ago.
Yes, 100%. As I said, there are so many, and not to say men don't deal with their own set of pressures, but there is this additional set of pressures. I feel like as women, one, the obvious, the biological one that we are not in control of, which is why I started this journey. Then there's it's self-inflicted one, but also probably compounded by society of like, okay, I'm a woman, I want to go find my career, I want to excel in that. And then there are those pressures within a career of like, okay, how do I speak up and be successful without seeming too aggressive or anything like that I feel like women deal with in all facets of life, but especially in the workplace. And then additionally, my own pressures of the goals I wanted to reach and the life I had envisioned for myself. And that's exhausting just talking about it, let alone having it go around in your head over and over for your entire life. And I think something leading up to like in the year before the pandemic, growing up, it was always me and my brother and our best friend. Our parents have been best friends for 50 years, so he's kind of like another brother. And at one point, the day my brother and my sister-in-law got engaged, my best friend and his wife had their first child, and I got sick because I was overworking myself at work. So I was like, whew, this is pretty eye-opening in what I've been prioritizing. And I think that moment really had me shift priorities from, okay, I always have to be climbing that career ladder. I always have to be, getting the next promotion, the next raise, the next job, to what are my life goals? Like what do I want to achieve? I've developed a really strong career for myself that I'm proud of, and I continue on today. But is that the only thing I want to prioritize first for myself? And that's the first moment that it kind of started to shift my priorities. Then I think, the pandemic just slapping us all in the face was another thing that it helped me shift my priorities, because I knew I wanted to buy a home one day. What I could afford in New York is not the home I envisioned for myself.
Sure.
So doing that kind of, again, like the pandemic, realizing where I was in terms of a timeline, whether it's self-imposed or societally imposed, of where I wanted to be, I realized, okay, I need to shift my priorities. I can still continue to move forward in my career, but also maybe make sure to put some of my own personal goals in the forefront as well, which is what got me thinking, maybe I want to move to find a house that I can afford and I'm happy with. Maybe, I want to be closer to my family when, I have nieces and nephews popping up, and my dad's getting older, and that was really important to me. And so I moved down to Florida, which if you had told 25-year-old Siobhan she would move to the state of Florida, she would have, not believed you.
That's so the thing about
it's just priority shift as you continue to get older. And that's kind of was the precipice of a lot of these journeys that I started during the pandemic.
Yeah. And that's so funny and interesting that you bring up like the 25-year-old self, because that's the thing. These journeys, take these turns that are completely unexpected and not how we envisioned. But I think what sounds so great that you've done is you really have stopped and thought about what do I want? What is my own timeline? Where do I want to live? Who do I want to be near? And I think that's so incredible. You've taken a lot of ownership and control over your journey based on thinking about what you want. So I think that is so, so, so amazing. I can't thank you enough again for being here. And before we wrap up, just, one piece of advice you might share with the audience and the people listening.
Schedule the appointment. I think that alone was so intimidating. I mentioned that I had a friend that recommended a couple places down here. I think she recommended them in March, and I didn't actually schedule the appointment until September. Maybe if I had made that call earlier, it wouldn't have been such an overwhelming Q1. Um, but I think, and this probably ties into anxieties I deal with, but I think just taking that first step, all of a sudden the doctors, the offices, they were telling me, laying out my next steps. So this process that seemed super intimidating and complex was all of a sudden like laid out for me.
Mm.
And I was fortunate enough where my insurance coverage through my job did cover some of this. So once I got the ball rolling, everything kind of started to move forward. And now the process, I mean, between like September, October, and February, I was done with at least one round. I know some women have to go through multiple rounds, but I think my advice is just make the call. The doctor I spoke to presented this as an insurance policy essentially whenever, if ever I am able to try to have kids with a partner, I would first try naturally. But now, if there is anything wrong, I have this insurance policy that's not guaranteed. It's not always successful, but at least, like I mentioned earlier, it's some sort of relief to this pressure that I had been building up over many, many years.
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of this option. It gives us some control over
Yeah,
the choices, and it preserves fertility in a way that if we need to, it's hopefully there. And
yeah,
I agree with you.
absolutely.
It's, sometimes these things, they are overwhelming and there's a lot of fear-based thinking around things. But when we actually start to do them, we realize that it's not as scary. So I appreciate that advice. And again, I appreciate you being here, and enjoy your travels, and very excited to have this episode out there and to share with everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much. This has been very enjoyable. And like I said, when my friend introduced me to your podcast, it was kind of like, yeah, in March when my friend recommended this, I wish I had seen like this content out there that would have helped me take that step earlier than I procrastinated because of anxiety. So I really appreciate that you're making kind of more of this
Oh.
information and these stories more accessible to women that might
Oh my
be
gosh. I thank you
just
so much
as
for saying that. And this is exactly what your story is going to do for other women. So thank you for being here and
yeah,
sharing.
of course.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Quiet the Clock, where we heard Siobhan's incredible journey through her egg freezing process, dating, navigating her 30s. Join us for future episodes on more stories from incredible women. If you like what you're hearing, subscribe to our channel on YouTube, follow us on Instagram, or check us out at quiettheclock.com. If you're ready to take charge of your relationship journey, visit quiettheclock.com today to download your free copy of Balancing the Biological Clock, expert advice on handling an unready partner. This is a guide I created for those navigating the complex terrain of differing timelines with your partner. It will provide you with exclusive insights on understanding your relationship by sparking meaningful conversations and encouraging you to take unconventional action in the face of life's most important decisions. Again, head over to quiettheclock.com now and claim your free copy of Balancing the Biological Clock, expert advice on handling an unready partner.